David got a raise, a good one, the kind people spend years chasing, the kind that was supposed to make life easier. For a while, it felt different. He checked his account and finally felt a little relief. Then something strange happened. The feeling faded. Not overnight, just slowly enough that he almost missed it. The bills were still there. The stress was still there. And life somehow felt surprisingly similar to before. One night he sat alone at the kitchen table, paycheck open, silence everywhere, trying to understand what wasn't working. If more money was the answer, why didn't life feel more free? That question stayed with him. A few weeks later, he spoke with an old friend named Alex, and something about the conversation bothered him. Alex mentioned making money that month, nothing unusual, until David learned how little Alex had actually worked. The numbers didn't make sense, at least not according to everything David believed about money. Alex wasn't chasing overtime, wasn't constantly exhausted, wasn't working every opportunity he could find. Yet somehow, his financial life kept moving forward, year after year. David couldn't stop thinking about it. The more he thought about it, the less the world seemed to make sense. Both men worked, both paid bills. Both started with very ordinary lives. Neither was a genius. Neither had won the lottery. Neither had some magical advantage. So why did one seem stuck, while the other kept creating financial momentum? That question changed everything. Most people believe wealth follows effort. Honestly, David believed that too. Work harder, earn more, build a better future. Simple. It sounds fair. It sounds logical. That's exactly why almost nobody questions it. But the economy quietly rewards something else, something most people spend decades overlooking while focusing entirely on income. David thought he needed a bigger paycheck. What he actually needed was a different understanding of how money really works. Welcome to Lyon Invests. Today we're exploring why the system rewards ownership more than hard work. And by the end, you'll understand the hidden pattern most people never see until it's too late. If that sounds valuable, subscribe to Lyon Invests. Let's continue. You may have noticed this yourself. Some people seem to work non-stop, yet never really get ahead. And then there are people who don't appear to be working any harder, but somehow their financial life keeps improving. Why? Most people assume the answer is income. And honestly, that's a reasonable assumption, because income is visible. You can see the paycheck, you can see the raise, you can see the overtime. Ownership is different. Ownership often works quietly in the background where nobody is paying attention. That's one reason so many people miss it. The human brain naturally focuses on what it can immediately see. Think about your own life for a second. You probably know exactly how much effort your job requires, but do you know how much your assets are earning? For many people, the answer is nothing, and that's where the story begins. This is not a criticism. It's actually how most of us were taught. Work first, ownership later. The problem is, later has a habit of never arriving. Years pass surprisingly fast. You may feel the same way. 1 year becomes 3, 3 becomes 10, and suddenly you're wondering where the time went. This is where things get uncomfortable. Because hard work is important, very important, but hard work by itself has limits. There are only so many hours you can sell, only so much energy you can give away. Eventually you run into a wall, not because you're lazy, because you're human. Ownership plays a different game. Ownership allows your money to continue working after your workday ends. That sounds simple, but the consequences are enormous, especially over long periods of time. Let me show you what I mean. Imagine two people earning exactly the same income for 20 years. One person spends almost everything. The other slowly acquires productive assets. Nothing dramatic, just consistent. For the first few years, the difference is almost invisible. That's what makes it so dangerous. Humans tend to abandon things that don't produce immediate rewards. Ownership often tests that weakness. The beginning feels slow, sometimes painfully slow, almost boring. But the really interesting part comes later, when small decisions begin producing outcomes that seem completely disconnected from the effort involved. This is where many people become confused, because they assume the outcome must have come from luck. Sometimes luck matters, but often they're seeing years of invisible ownership finally becoming visible. And honestly, this next part surprised me when I first understood it. Many people are not struggling because they lack effort. They're struggling because effort is the only tool they've been taught to use. Once you see that distinction, you start looking at money differently, and that's where everything begins to change. You may not realize it, but most financial decisions are not really financial decisions. They're emotional decisions wearing financial clothes. Think about the last thing you bought that wasn't planned. What were you feeling right before you bought it? That's usually where the real answer lives. Sometimes it's stress. Sometimes it's boredom. Sometimes it's the desire to feel like progress is happening. And honestly, there's nothing unusual about that. It's how human beings are wired. The problem appears when emotions repeatedly make decisions that your future self has to pay for. Most people don't wake up and decide to avoid ownership. It happens gradually, one small choice at a time. A little more spending today, a little less investing this month, a little more waiting until next year. None of those decisions feel important individually. That's exactly why they're powerful. Small repeated behaviors become entire futures. People rarely notice this while it's happening. The same principle works in reverse. Small repeated ownership decisions can become life-changing over time. You don't need a dramatic transformation. Most people actually fail because they're searching for one. The financial world loves big stories, huge gains, overnight success, life-changing moments. Real wealth is usually much quieter and much less exciting. At least in the beginning, you buy a share, then another, then another. Nothing feels different. Months pass, then years. Still nothing dramatic. And this is where most people quit. Not because it doesn't work, because it doesn't feel like it's working. Human psychology loves immediate evidence. Ownership often asks for patience before evidence appears. That's a difficult trade, especially in a world designed to reward immediate gratification. Every app wants your attention. Every advertisement wants your money. Every platform wants a reaction. Ownership asks for something different: patience, discipline, and delayed satisfaction. Those qualities rarely feel exciting in the moment, but they become incredibly valuable over time. Let me give you a simple example. Imagine investing $500 every month for 30 years. At first, the account barely moves. You might even wonder if it's worth doing. Then compounding starts to appear, slowly, almost quietly. Your money begins earning money. Then those earnings begin earning money too. This is where math starts doing work that effort alone can never accomplish. And here's what most people miss. Compounding doesn't just apply to money, it applies to behavior. A habit repeated for 10 years becomes a completely different life. That's true financially, and it's true psychologically. You may be thinking, that sounds great, but I feel too far behind. A lot of people feel that way, more than you probably realize. The mind has a strange habit. It focuses on how far there is to go, instead of how far you've already come. That mindset often keeps people frozen, waiting for the perfect time, waiting for more certainty. But ownership rarely begins with certainty. It usually begins with a decision, a small decision, repeated consistently, long enough to matter. The good news is that ownership is more accessible today than at almost any time in history. You don't need millions of dollars. You don't need to own an entire company. You don't need perfect timing. You simply need to start building something that can work without your direct labor. Maybe that's an investment account. Maybe it's a business. Maybe it's another productive asset. The specific asset matters less than the principle behind it. Ownership, because ownership creates leverage, and leverage changes outcomes. Not immediately, not dramatically, but consistently. That's the part most people underestimate. Consistency is often more powerful than intensity. A single burst of effort feels impressive. Years of steady ownership create results that look impossible from the outside. And then people call it luck, or timing, or privilege. Sometimes those factors matter, but often they're looking at decades of invisible decisions finally becoming visible. The system does reward hard work, just not in the way most people expect. Hard work creates income. Ownership creates momentum. The combination creates freedom. So maybe the better question isn't, how hard are you working? Maybe the better question is, What are you building that can continue working after you stop? Because your future will not be shaped by one big financial decision. It will be shaped by thousands of small ownership decisions nobody sees. And those quiet decisions can change everything. If this made you think differently about money, subscribe to Lyon Invests and let me know your biggest takeaway in the comments.